This adventurous story begins in a time when magical beasts roamed the earth. Among these magical creatures were orcs, goblins, elves, and even gods, each belonging to different levels of power. However, over time, these groups began to turn against each other. Some factions desired to be at the top of the hierarchy because they had the largest numbers. Due to this reason, conflicts arose between the gods, orcs, goblins, and elves. Their armies clashed, each striving to establish dominance. Caught in the middle of this great war were the poor humans. Unlike the others, they had neither powers nor special abilities. They suffered the most in terms of life and territory. Realizing their helplessness, the humans decided not to fight anyone and allowed anyone who wished to settle in their territory. As a result, magical beasts spread everywhere, including human colonies, trying to establish their dominance. The most dangerous among them were the orcs, also known as goblins. They were ruthless, not only to their enemies but even to their own kind. Their only goal was to defeat their adversaries and bring the entire earth under their control. One day, a group of goblins heard strange, eerie screams. The sounds resembled those from hell, signaling that a portal to the underworld was about to open. How could this be possible? The goblins began investigating the matter. Soon, a prominent group of goblins, known as the Shadow Army, was introduced. This army was determined to open the gates of hell and revive their god of death. They performed countless rituals and sacrifices to achieve this goal. In a desert region, a goblin was seen riding a massive dragon, traveling toward an unknown destination. The goblins were extremely dangerous and spared no human they encountered. However, as this goblin traveled some distance, an elf named Namit suddenly ambushed him, targeting his dragon. The dragon was severely wounded and crashed to the ground. A short while later, Namit arrived at the scene and confirmed that the dragon had died. However, she also noticed clear footprints leading away from the area, evidence that the goblin had survived and escaped. Namit had been hunting this goblin because he had committed numerous murders. To him, humans were nothing more than insects to be crushed in an instant. Determined to end his terror, Namit pursued the goblin without delay. The goblin tried to fight back, but Namit was too fast for him. Dodging the goblin's attack, Namit swiftly used her sword to decapitate him. However, the real problem arose when, before dying, the goblin placed a curse on Namit. As a result of this curse, a strange mark began to form on her hand, displaying an unusual structure. Namit dismissed the curse as something trivial, unaware that it would eventually lead to a catastrophic disaster. Meanwhile, we are introduced to a man named Kelvin, a devoted servant of the gods. The gods had assigned him an important mission, to stop the Shadow Army at any cost. They could not be allowed to succeed. Determined to fulfill his duty, Kelvin traveled continuously until he reached a cave where a dwarf resided. Upon meeting the dwarf, Kelvin questioned him about the whereabouts of the Shadow Army and how their secret plan could be stopped. In response, the dwarf revealed a mark on his hand, the same symbol as the Shadow Armies, signifying his loyalty to them. This revelation shocked Kelvin because Namit had an identical mark on her hand, meaning she, too, had unknowingly become connected to the Shadow Army. The dwarf tried to intimidate Kelvin, warning him to join the Shadow Army or face a gruesome death. He declared that no one could stop their mission, not even the gods, many of whom feared confronting them. The dwarf further revealed that the Shadow Army was determined to resurrect the god of death by offering the bone of vessel as a tribute. If successful, they and the goblins would become the most powerful force in existence. In a cunning move, the dwarf threw a bomb at Kelvin, attempting to kill him. However, Kelvin reacted swiftly, hurling the bomb back at the dwarf. The explosion was instantaneous, leaving the dwarf no time to escape, and he perished in the blast. Afterward, Kelvin took one of the dwarf's severed hands as proof of his demise and set off for his next mission. Meanwhile, the Shadow Army, comprising goblins, was shown preparing their ultimate ritual. With the bone of vessel in their possession, they were dangerously close to reviving the god of death. The ritual was progressing smoothly, and it seemed like the Shadow Army was on the verge of success. Meanwhile, another group of goblins was introduced, led by a goblin named Kale. Kale was deeply troubled by the fact that the bone vessel had been handed over to the Shadow Army. He knew exactly how dangerous it could be in their hands. Another goblin named Grade was also present, and he strongly opposed Kale's concerns. This led to a heated dispute between them, which quickly escalated into a battle. The rule was simple: whoever won would become the new leader of the goblin group. Kale fought valiantly, putting up a good challenge, but Grade outmaneuvered him and ultimately emerged victorious. With Kale defeated, Grade became the new leader of the group. Meanwhile, Kelvin was shown meeting with his goddess, informing her of everything he had learned from the dwarf. He explained that the Shadow Army was planning something sinister using the bone vessel. The goddess warned Kelvin that if the Shadow Army succeeded in resurrecting the god of death, it would lead to an unimaginable catastrophe, one so powerful that even the gods themselves might not be able to stop it. Thus, they had to find a solution as soon as possible. She then guided Kelvin, instructing him to seek out the general, as he had captured a goblin named Magit. This goblin held crucial information that could help stop the Shadow Army. Understanding the urgency, Kelvin immediately set off for the Empire, heading straight to the general. Upon reaching the Empire, Kelvin's eyes instantly fell upon Namit, who was also present there. Namit, too, had come to meet the general, as she had captured a notorious goblin with a bounty on its head. The general had placed a 500 gold coin reward for the goblin's death. However, when Namit presented the severed head of the goblin, the general only offered her 400 gold coins. This enraged Namit, as she had endured great difficulties to kill the goblin, not to mention the fact that the goblin had cursed her before dying. In frustration, Namit showed the strange mark that had appeared on her hand due to the curse. The general, upon seeing it, immediately realized the severity of the situation. The mark on Namit's hand was identical to those found on members of the Shadow Army. The general, unwilling to take any risks, immediately ordered his soldiers to imprison Namit. She was locked away in a dark, heavily guarded dungeon. Inside the same dungeon, we were introduced to Magit, the goblin the goddess had previously mentioned. The moment Magit saw the Shadow Army's mark on Namit's hand, he rushed toward her, assuming she was also a member of the Shadow Army. Believing Namit to be an ally, Magit started revealing crucial information. He explained the path to reaching the bone of vessel, the process of creating it, and how it could be used to resurrect the god of death. Magit told Namit that her first priority should be to find the breeding stone, as it was the key to activating the vessel. Using the breeding stone, sacred blood had to be poured into the vessel to complete the ritual. As Magit continued explaining, Namit asked where to find the breeding stone. This immediately made Magit suspicious because every true member of the Shadow Army was already supposed to know its location. Realizing something was off, Magit suddenly attacked Namit. However, Namit was far stronger than him. She swiftly overpowered Magit and killed him on the spot. A short while later, Kelvin arrived at the dungeon, only to find Magit already dead. Realizing that Namit was the one who had killed him, Kelvin understood that she was not actually a member of the Shadow Army, she had simply been cursed by accident. Kelvin also recognized that Namit could be useful in his mission. Since she was now marked by the Shadow Army's curse, she was deeply involved in their affairs. Seeing an opportunity, he decided to free Namit from the dungeon and take her with him. Kelvin made Namit an offer: if she agreed to help him spy on the Shadow Army and uncover their plans, he would ask the goddess to remove her curse. Namit had little choice but to agree to his deal. As they left, a mysterious woman suddenly appeared in their path. She warned Kelvin, "Your death is near." However, Kelvin didn't believe in such things and ignored her, choosing instead to continue his journey into the forest with Namit. As they traveled, Kelvin explained the plan to Namit once more. He told her that if she helped him stop the Shadow Army, he would ensure that the goddess lifted her curse. However, Namit made one request: untie my hands. The moment Kelvin loosened her restraints, Namit grabbed a sword and attacked him. Because Namit had never worked under anyone, she and Kelvin were on equal footing when it came to sword fighting. However, Kelvin later convinced Namit that they needed to work together to survive. Understanding this, Namit agreed to his plan. Namit then told Kelvin that their first priority was to find the breeding stone, which was somewhere on the other side of the forest. Kelvin and Namit understood the importance of this and continued their journey. After traveling for a while, they saw a goblin tied up in front of them. It was none other than Kale, the goblin who had been defeated by Gred. He was bound and being punished. Kelvin gently asked him what he knew. Kale then revealed that the Shadow Army's goblins were trying to revive the god of death, and to do that, they needed the bone of vessel. However, this artifact would only work if it was activated by combining it with a flower that bloomed on the breeding stone. Kale proposed a deal: if they freed him, he would lead them to the breeding stone. Kelvin trusted Kale, so he decided to release him. The three of them then set off towards the breeding stone. After a long journey, they finally reached it, but the flower hadn't bloomed yet. Kelvin began to suspect that Namit wasn't telling them the whole truth. He questioned her again about what Mage had actually said, but Namit insisted that she had already told him everything. However, they needed to wait for the flower to bloom before taking any further action. That night, everyone stayed near the breeding stone. The next morning, for some unknown reason, Namit went up to the breeding stone and pulled out a hidden chest filled with golden coins. She then took the coins and started leaving. When Kelvin and Kale realized what was happening, they were shocked. It seemed like Namit had betrayed them. As soon as they tried to follow her, the Shadow Army suddenly attacked. These soldiers were extremely dangerous and attempted to kill them. But within moments, Namit reappeared, this time, helping Kelvin and Kale fight off their enemies. She was battling alongside them, proving that she had not betrayed them after all. However, things got worse when a massive monster from the Shadow Group appeared. The terrifying creature grabbed Kale, preparing to attack. But Cal showed great bravery and ripped out the creature's heart, killing it instantly. Kelvin and Namit also showcased their swordsmanship, eliminating the goblins. The doubts that Kelvin and Cal had about Namit betraying them turned out to be false. Now, according to their plan, they set out to retrieve the vessel, which was in the possession of an empire. Kelvin and Cal were still unsure whether they should trust Namit, but they had no other choice but to move forward. At one point, Kelvin directly spoke to his goddess and requested, "Can you remove Namit's curse?" However, the goddess responded that Namit had committed terrible deeds and was an enemy who was destined to die. Therefore, she insisted that they should not use magic to lift her curse. But Kelvin argued that Namit had helped them significantly and deserved a chance to live. Meanwhile, Namit cleverly disguised herself as a chieftain and approached the leaders of the Empire's tribe. She offered them a large amount of gold coins, making it seem like she was their true leader. In exchange, she successfully obtained the vessel. However, just as she was about to leave with it, the real chieftain arrived. Realizing the deception, he attacked Namit and took back the vessel. The goblin soldiers captured Namit and took her away. She tried to escape, but it was impossible. The goblin group delivered Namit to Grade and his allies before leaving in search of the flower that grew atop the breeding stone. Meanwhile, Kelvin and Cal were shown discussing their next moves. Kelvin decided to go after the general, while Cal insisted on saving Namit from the goblins. With their different objectives, they both set out separately. Soon, Kelvin confronted the general. Before the fight, the general said, "You are a great warrior. If you join the Shadow Army, the god of death will make you immortal." However, Kelvin refused to betray his loyalty to the goddess. The fight began, but the general overpowered Kelvin, injuring him severely and leaving him on the ground. After defeating Kelvin, the general walked away. Kelvin lay there, breathing his last breaths when suddenly, the same mysterious lady appeared, the one who had warned him that he had little time left. She removed her cloak, revealing herself to be a hidden goddess who had been living among humans. The goddess transferred some of her power to Kelvin, healing him and ensuring his survival. Meanwhile, Namit was surrounded by goblins, and Grade, who controlled the goblins, was also there. Grade repeatedly approached Namit, trying to make her his toy, but before he could do anything, Cal arrived. Cal had come to settle his score with Grade, so he challenged him to a fight once again. As soon as Grade engaged in swordplay, Cal defeated him in a single strike, then rushed to Namit, grabbing her and attempting to escape. The goblins chased them like mad beasts, but suddenly, an arrow struck Namit's body, causing her to lose consciousness. Cal was determined to save her at any cost, so he lifted her onto his shoulders and ran. Many goblins continued their pursuit, forcing them to dive into a river. The strong current carried them safely to the other side, where they could rest in a secure location. After reaching a safe place, Cal treated Namit's wounds. As she regained consciousness, she was filled with rage, vowing not to spare the Shadow Army. Determined to move forward, Namit and Cal continued their journey until they reached a rocky terrain. Suddenly, a dwarf warrior attacked them from above. When Namit rushed toward him, he immediately threw a net, capturing her. The dwarf then began firing at Cal, but Kelvin arrived just in time. Without wasting a moment, Kelvin killed the dwarf and took his weapons. Now, the three friends were reunited once again. Kelvin explained everything to them. The Shadow Army had both the blood vessel and the sacred flower, which meant they were close to reviving the god of death. To stop them, they devised a plan. Namit would infiltrate the Shadow Army, as her tattoo would make them believe she was one of their own. Without wasting any time, the three arrived at the location where the Shadow Army was performing the ritual. Namit dressed in their attire and blended in, ensuring that no one recognized her. The general of the Shadow Army ordered his men to sacrifice several women, as this was part of the ritual. The Shadow Army was now very close to completing the ritual. If successful, they would resurrect the god of death, gaining so much power that they could wage war against the gods. Because of Namit's matching tattoos, she remained undetected among them as the sacrifices continued. Then, the leader of the Shadow Army arrived and noticed Namit. He dragged her forward, preparing her for sacrifice. But just at that moment, Cal distracted everyone by killing one of the Shadow soldiers, causing chaos in the ritual. As soon as the Shadow Army soldiers saw this, they immediately went on high alert, searching for their enemies. Chaos erupted all around. Taking advantage of the distraction, Namit drew her sword and attempted to kill the Shadow Army leader, but he was not so easy to defeat. He possessed dark chains that allowed him to control Namit's body movements. Realizing that time was running out, the leader commanded his soldiers to kill Namit. Moments later, Grade, the goblin, arrived and attacked Namit from behind, injuring her severely. But just then, Cal arrived. Furious and determined to protect Namit, Cal engaged in a fierce battle with Grade. The fight was intense, but Cal was driven by rage. At a critical moment, Cal overpowered Grade and beheaded him. Meanwhile, Namit continued battling the Shadow Army leader, dragging him away from the Hell Gate while attacking him. However, the leader was obsessed with reviving the god of death. Without hesitation, he combined the bone of vessel with the sacred flower and jumped straight into the Hell Gate. Namit, heavily wounded, also leaped after him, but it was too late. She realized that she had failed her mission. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and from within the Hell Gate, a massive entity emerged, the god of death himself. His power was immense, capable of destroying everything. However, at this moment, he was not yet fully evolved. To gain his full strength, he needed to absorb countless souls. Using his dark energy, the god of death began killing soldiers, absorbing their souls to increase his power. Then, he turned his wrath upon Kelvin. But something was different. Kelvin seemed faster and stronger than ever. It was as if he had been infused with a new kind of power. Kelvin dodged the god of death's attacks effortlessly. Then, Kelvin grabbed the god of death's own weapon, and as soon as he did, it was charged with electricity. This was happening because Kelvin had absorbed a large amount of the goddess's power. Now, Kelvin had become more powerful than ever before. Gathering all his energy, Kelvin channeled his power into the weapon and struck the god of death with a devastating blow. The god of death didn't even understand what was happening. The moment the weapon struck him, his energy was drained away. The goddess's power was overwhelming, and it completely destroyed the god of death's physical form. His soul was sealed back within the Hell Gate, ensuring that he could never return. To rebuild his body, the god of death would have to wait for many more years. Kelvin and his companions had averted a massive catastrophe. If they had failed, just as the goddess had warned, the entire world would have faced destruction. However, Kelvin was deeply saddened, because Namit was on the verge of death. Seeing her like this, it became clear that Kelvin had developed feelings for Namit. Unable to watch her die, Kelvin transferred all his remaining power into Namit. As soon as he did this, Namit came back to life, stronger and healthier than ever before. The Shadow Army's cursed mark disappeared from her hand, meaning she was finally free from the curse. With the threat defeated, Kelvin, Namit, and Cal set out on a new journey. The three of them would stay together and continue their adventures. And with that, our story comes to an end.